Number 7. Faster Horses Incident. In July of 2021, 3 young men were found dead in a camping trailer while attending the Faster Horses Music Festival in Michigan. The event, which takes place at the Michigan International Speedway, is also known as the 3-day Hillbilly Sleepover, as most festival goers will typically camp in and around the racetrack. After a concerned friend of the group had called the emergency services, first responders arrived at the scene and opened the camping trailer to find 5 men, all of whom were unconscious. Dawson Brown and Richie Mays II, both aged 20, were pronounced dead at the scene, as was 19-year-old Cole Sova. All 3 were Michigan Center High School graduates who'd played on the same football team. 20-year-olds Rayfield Johnson and Curtis Stitt were taken to the hospital in critical condition but ultimately survived. In what Lenawee County Sheriff Troy Bevier deemed to have been an absolutely tragic event, it was determined that the men had suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning. They hadn't properly stored a generator they'd been using, which resulted in them inhaling the deadly fumes. In the aftermath, Sheriff Bevier issued a warning to people using generators, urging them to make sure such devices were kept in a well-ventilated area. Number 6. Michaela Hostetler. After she'd attended the 2018 edition of the Faster Horses Festival in Michigan, a young woman was fatally struck by an SUV. On July the 23rd, Michaela Hostetler, aged 19, was walking on the shoulder of the road near the Michigan International Speedway alongside her boyfriend, 21-year-old Colin Campbell. Even though the festival had just ended, a number of attendees were reportedly heading to after-parties. Shortly after 4 a.m., 17-year-old Jose Mora was driving his 2005 Chevrolet Trailblazer north on Brooklyn Highway. By his account, Mora glanced at his gear shift and only peripherally spotted the couple before plowing into them. He denied that he'd been looking at his phone prior to the collision, although a test revealed it had been used 7 times between 4:10 and 4:20 a.m., a timeline corresponding to that in which the accident was suspected to have occurred. Hostetler sustained mortal injuries while Campbell was left in critical condition. He had no recollection of the crash after sustaining traumatic brain injuries, for which he spent considerable time at an inpatient rehabilitation center. There were no charges filed against Mora, as prosecutors deemed there wasn't enough evidence to pursue a criminal case. At the time of the accident, he was under the limit for alcohol consumption, and there was no irrefutable indication of moving violations or distracted driving. Number 5. Luella Fletcher Mitchie. An hour before her 25th birthday on September the 10th of 2017, a woman died in the woods at the edge of the Bestival Music Festival in Dorset, England. Luella Fletcher Mitchie, daughter of Scottish film and television actor John Mitchie, was attending the festival with her boyfriend, Sion Brufton, aged 28. The aspiring rapper had reportedly procured the recreational drug 2CP, classified as a Class A substance, and given it to Fletcher Mitchie. He then filmed her over a period of 6 hours as she began to hallucinate on the drug and beg for help, leading up to her death. At various moments in the harrowing footage, Fletcher Mitchie tried eating thorns and had begun to slap herself in an evident state of confusion, with Brufton at one point calling her a drama queen. In spite of her being in distress, Brufton didn't take her to the festival's hospital tent, even though they were only several hundred yards from it. Prosecutors would later argue that it was because he feared repercussions stemming from a suspended prison sentence he'd been given about a month prior. Fletcher Mitchie began shouting for her parents and eventually talked to them on the phone. They immediately began the 120-mile drive from London to Dorset, but unfortunately arrived too late to find her alive. It was subsequently argued that she was already dead at Brufton's feet in the last video he'd taken of her. He was arrested but defended his actions by claiming that he didn't want to leave Fletcher Mitchie alone in the woods to get help, and that he only thought she was having a bad trip. He was found guilty of manslaughter by gross negligence in February of 2019. His 8.5-year prison sentence was overturned on appeal, and only a drug charge remained, as a judge determined prosecutors had failed to prove that Fletcher Mitchie would have survived had she received help. Number 4. Isabella Cimetta. Texas teenager Isabella Cimetta suffered a fatal gunshot wound to her abdomen while at a Renaissance fair on October the 25th, of 2020, the authorities responded to reports of a disturbance at the Texas Renaissance Festival campgrounds in Todd Mission at around 2:40 a.m. 19-year-old Simetta and Sean Campbell, aged 22, were acquaintances who'd traveled to the festival along with other friends. Another attendee, Mitchell Heasley, told investigators that he and Simetta had gotten into an argument. Campbell then intervened and put a gun to Heasley's head. According to a probable cause affidavit, an altercation ensued with the former attempting to disarm Campbell. During the struggle, the weapon discharged and a round struck Simetta, who later passed away. Campbell fled the scene but was later found in a car with a 6-hour 9mm handgun in the glove compartment. He admitted to firing the shot that killed Simetta and was held at Grimes County Jail on 2 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Number 3. Astroworld Crush. On November the 5th of 2021, a massive human crush occurred at the Energy Park in Houston, Texas, during a performance by rapper Travis Scott on the first day of the Astroworld Festival. 8 people died on the night of the concert and 2 more passed away from their injuries over the following days, while at least 25 were hospitalized. Live Nation, along with its affiliates, operated and managed the disastrous event, which was also streamed live by Apple Music. Since the morning hours before the scheduled opening, groups had begun breaching checkpoints and flooding the venue. As noted by the Houston Police Department, volatile crowd behavior continued into the evening, with hundreds being treated at the festival's aid stations. There was no act on the festival's second stage, therefore the estimated 50,000 in attendance all assembled outside the main stage to watch Scott, who was also the festival's founder, as he began his performance at 9:02 p.m. Houston Fire Chief Sam Pena would later tell the media that the crowd began to compress towards the front of the stage, while also surging from the sides, and the concert rapidly devolved into chaos. Concert goers began falling and trampling over each other. Multiple sources, including forensic analysis and video evidence, indicated that at least one attendee was fatally crushed under a mass of people right at the concert's onset, with no evidence he ever got up again. 10 minutes into Scott's performance, a tightly packed group of fans in the crowd's southern quadrant began screaming for help. Those who died or suffered critical injuries are believed to have suffered compressive asphyxiation after being forced into as little as 1.85 square feet of space per person. Medical personnel couldn't reach those in need, as piles of fans were nearly 2-person deep in some areas. In the pandemonium, there were instances of unconscious fans being crowd-surfed to safety. Many had started chanting for the show to be stopped, while one woman was filmed climbing a ladder to the media tower and pleading for help from camera operators. A man joined her shouting, "People are dying!" while elsewhere in the crowd, fans had started dancing on top of ambulances, fruitlessly trying to get through. Scott had paused his performance a total of 3 times throughout, once to report that someone had passed out, but continued singing after each one, encouraging more fervent reactions from his fans. The concert ended at 10:12 and gained widespread notoriety in the aftermath. The investigation is ongoing, but a number of lawsuits have already been launched against Scott and the festival's operators. While there had been considerable problems with the festival's overall organization, the rapper himself was also heavily criticized for not stopping the concert or attempting to better control the crowd. Today's topic was requested by Victor Alexander, Jayanath R., and Amanda Stapleton. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Alexandra Ross King. In January of 2019, a young Australian woman died of an MDMA overdose at the FOMO Music Festival in Parramatta Park. While heading to the event, 19-year-old Alexandra Ross King and her friends had stopped in Gosford, where they bought drugs from a local dealer. They then took a bus to the festival held in the western part of Sydney. Because drinks at the event were so expensive, the group decided to arrive already drunk and consumed juice mixed with vodka on the way. In about half an hour, Ross King took roughly 3/4 of an MDMA capsule, which she washed down with alcohol. Before entering the FOMO festival, she ingested 2 more capsules at once, nervous that the police might find the drugs on her. She spent the next few hours dancing as temperatures climbed up to 95 degrees Fahrenheit and drinking vodka mixed with Red Bull. She then began to feel unwell, and her friends helped her to a medical tent, where she began to suffer from muscle spasms, high fever, and irregular breathing. The teenager was rushed to Westmead Hospital, where she suffered multiple cardiac arrests and ultimately passed away. 2 unnamed men aged 20 and 23 were arrested in the aftermath by Gosford police for indirectly supplying the drugs that had claimed Ross King's life. Number 1. Mawazine Stampede. Shortly after midnight on May the 24th of 2009, a deadly stampede occurred at a soccer stadium in Rabat, Morocco, during the Mawazine International Music Festival. A free concert by pop star Abdelaziz Stati had begun later than billed, allowing festival attendees who'd finished concerts at other locations to make their way to the Hey Nada Stadium. The stampede occurred towards the end of the performance, when many of the 70,000 in attendance tried to leave the stadium at the same time. A wire fence collapsed as the enormous mass of people began overflowing out of the venue. 11 concert goers died, with their bodies only discovered after the stampede had ended, and at least as many were hospitalized. Rescuers subsequently had to pull survivors from the wreckage. The governor of Rabat at the time blamed the tragedy on the concert goers, claiming they decided to go over the metal barriers to have a quick exit. However, survivors questioned why the exits had been shut, even though it was a free concert, and why the police officers at the scene, which numbered close to 3,000, hadn't intervened when the incident had become serious. King Mohammed VI extended his condolences to the victims' families and offered to pay for funeral and hospital costs. Number 7. The Carnation Murders. The Anderson family of Carnation, Washington, was attacked on Christmas Eve 2007 while preparing for their holiday party. King County police officers were dispatched to the home of Wayne and Judy Anderson following a mysterious 911 call made by someone inside the house. The caller neglected to identify themselves and immediately hung up after dispatchers heard what sounded like some sort of argument in the background. When deputies arrived at the scene, they were unable to gain access to the residence due to a locked front gate. Rather than investigate further, the officers left. 2 days later, Judy Anderson's friend and co-worker, Linda Thiel, went to the home to check on Judy as she'd been absent from work. Thiel peered through the window and saw multiple bodies on the floor. She called 911 to report her findings, and King County officers were sent to the Andersons' home. It was on that second dispatchment to the property that 6 dead bodies were discovered inside the residence. The victims were identified as Wayne and Judy Anderson, their son and daughter-in-law, and their 2 grandchildren. While detectives were investigating the crime scene, the Andersons' 29-year-old daughter Michelle and her boyfriend, Joseph McEnroe, drove up to the house and was subsequently taken in for questioning by the police. The pair would later admit to murdering Michelle's family members. According to subsequent testimony, the victims were shot a combined 14 times by the 2 killers, who'd reportedly showed up to the house on the afternoon of December the 24th of 2007. Michelle's parents, Wayne and Judy, were the first to have been gunned down. The other 4 victims were killed after they'd arrived at the house a short while later. Michelle's sister-in-law, Erica, was able to get a hold of the home's cordless phone and dial 911 before succumbing to her wounds. McEnroe quickly destroyed the phone and removed its batteries, which accounted for the call's abrupt disconnection that had previously puzzled the emergency dispatchers. The 2 perpetrators were ultimately convicted on multiple counts of first-degree murder and were both sentenced to life in prison. Number 6. Nicole Perkins. A 24-year-old Texas woman was shot dead in the early morning hours of December the 22nd of 2019. Nicole Perkins had been attending a holiday party for the horseback trail riding group of which she was a part, called the Buck Wild Gang. Just before 3 a.m., Dallas County authorities were called to the dance hall in Oak Cliff, where the party had taken place, after receiving reports of shots fired on the premises. Upon their arrival, officers discovered that a woman later identified as Perkins had suffered gunshot wounds that would ultimately prove fatal. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Reportedly, an argument had flared up in the parking lot of the dance hall after the party had ended. There was a large crowd of people gathered outside when the situation suddenly escalated into a gunfight. The police were told by witnesses at the scene that multiple individuals had begun firing at each other, and Perkins, who was not involved in the dispute, was unfortunately caught in the crossfire. Investigators were unable to positively identify any suspects in the deadly shooting, and as of the case's latest updates, there had been no arrests made. A former three-sport athlete at Ennis High School, Perkins had worked as a medical provider at Baylor Scott and White Health prior to her untimely passing. Number 5. Caitlin Armand. 30-year-old James Talker shot and killed his estranged wife on Christmas Day 2016 at his home in King City, Oregon. At roughly 10 p.m. on the night, Caitlin Armand, aged 24, dropped the couple's 11-month-old daughter off at Talker's residence, which he reportedly shared with his mother and stepfather. After taking the girl into the house, Talker walked back outside, approached Armand's vehicle, and shot the woman 8 times with a 9mm handgun he'd purchased from a private seller the night before. Upon hearing gunfire, Talker's mother came outside to find her son sitting in his car. As she tapped on the window, he abruptly drove away. Just a few moments later, Talker called his mother and confessed to killing Armand. He then told her of his intention to take his own life. During the course of the next hour, Talker contacted one of his wife's friends as well as her sister to tell them of Armand's death. He was soon pursued by multiple Washington County police officers. During the resulting chase, Talker critically injured a state trooper, but was eventually shot by police off Highway 99W. Armand had made a number of domestic violence claims against Talker during their relationship, and the couple had been separated for roughly a year and a half prior to the fatal incident. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, Talker had sent Armand hundreds of texts in which he either begged her to take him back or threatened to kill her. On the night of Armand's murder, Talker had changed his Facebook profile picture to a photograph taken on the couple's wedding day. Number 4. Samina Imam. 34-year-old Samina Imam of Cardiff, Wales, was murdered by her lover and his brother on December 24th of 2014. Imam, a marketing manager at Costco, had previously struck up a relationship with a co-worker named Roger Cooper, aged 39. Cooper was also married at the time and had a total of 3 romantic partners, including Imam. After Imam had given him an ultimatum to leave his wife and make their relationship public, Cooper put together a plan to kill his mistress in order to keep her from divulging the details of their 2-year affair. He enlisted the help of his brother David, an ex-soldier. After months of preparation, the murderous plot was finally set into motion on Christmas Eve 2014. In the evening, Cooper brought Imam to David's home in Leicester, England, after work. David subsequently overpowered the victim on his sofa, smothering her with a chloroform-soaked rag. The brothers immediately disposed of her body, burying it in an allotment with the help of a friend. Imam was reported missing by her family after she'd failed to return home for Christmas. Her whereabouts had been unknown until her body was found on January the 4th of 2015. Roger and David Cooper were arrested 3 days later and eventually admitted to carrying out the murder. The brothers had covertly communicated with each other through Star Wars-themed texts, exchanging messages like "Death Star complete" and "Stay on target, you are expected, Vader," to conceal the true nature of their plans. They were both found guilty of Imam's murder and were given prison sentences of 30 years each. Number 3. Caroli Taylor. On December the 24th of 2019, Houston woman Caroli Taylor was killed by her ex-boyfriend during a family get-together that was celebrating her 46th birthday. The party took place at the home of Taylor's uncle, Dominique Ortiz. The family had just finished singing "Happy Birthday" to Taylor when Ortiz noticed a black Jeep pull up in front of the residence. Taylor's ex-partner, 52-year-old Albert Simon, emerged from the vehicle carrying a long-barrel firearm. As Simon approached the house, Ortiz went outside to confront him. The homeowner would later tell police that Simon then forced his way inside the home and demanded Taylor go with him on a walk. He threatened the woman and her family with violence if she refused, so she agreed to step outside. Not long after the two had left the house, Simon fired 5 rounds at his ex-girlfriend, killing her instantly. The gunman fled the scene and was on the run for roughly 4 days before he was ultimately caught by police at Herman Park. He was shot dead by Houston officers after reaching inside his bag. Taylor had reportedly ended her relationship with Simon just a week prior to her murder. Hours before the party, she'd received multiple threatening texts from the man who would eventually end her life. She was survived by a daughter named Maya. Today's topic was requested by Instagram follower Sydney Bayake. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Or follow us on Instagram and reach out to us there. Number 2. Alexis Valdez. an 18-year-old Chicago resident decapitated his aunt's boyfriend and proceeded to give his severed head to her as a present on Christmas Day of 2013. Alexis Valdez had previously moved in with his aunt and her partner, 41-year-old Silvestre Diaz Hernandez, under several conditions that included him going to school, holding a steady job, and helping pay for household bills. In the months leading up to the gruesome incident, Valdez had stopped holding up his end of the agreed-upon bargain. He was no longer attending school and had quit his job, prompting his aunt to request that he move out. A disgruntled Valdez then made plans to murder Diaz Hernandez as a form of revenge towards his aunt. The teenager would later disclose to investigators that he assaulted his aunt's boyfriend with a hammer, leaving a hole in his skull. When the victim was dead, Valdez then mutilated his corpse. He removed the eyes, nose, and ears from Diaz Hernandez's head, then separated the head from the rest of his body. He placed the severed body part on his aunt's bed, later telling police he wanted to leave her a present for Christmas. Valdez then called 911 and told dispatchers of the dead body. When emergency responders asked if he had attempted CPR, Valdez simply laughed off the question and revealed that the body had been decapitated. When officers arrived at the scene, they found the perpetrator covered in blood. In February of 2017, Valdez pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to 33 years in prison. Number 1. The Covina Massacre. In 2008, a man dressed as Santa Claus showed up at a Christmas Eve party in Covina, California, and viciously murdered 9 people, including his ex-wife. The perpetrator was later revealed as Bruce Pardo, aged 45, whose divorce had been finalized only a week prior to the incident. At around 11:30 p.m., Pardo knocked on the front door of his former in-law's house while donning a Santa costume and holding a gift-wrapped package. A party attended by roughly 25 people was taking place inside the home. When the door was opened, Pardo forced his way in and pulled out multiple 9mm handguns from inside the box. He began firing indiscriminately at the horrified house guests, who fled to different parts of the home. One survivor managed to escape to a next-door neighbor's house and contact the police. Investigators would later determine that Pardo had likely murdered some of his victims, execution style at point-blank range. After Pardo had finished shooting, he further unwrapped the package to reveal a rolling air compressor that had been rigged to spray gasoline. Once the gas had been disseminated thoroughly, he set the house on fire. The resulting blaze reportedly rose up to 50 feet in the air. It took 90 minutes for 80 firefighters to finally put out the flames. After igniting the fire, Pardo changed into street clothes and drove to his brother's house 30 miles away. He would later take his own life by way of a self-inflicted gunshot to the head. Police theorized that Pardo's initial plan was to flee the state after carrying out the attack. However, after suffering third-degree burns from the house fire, some of which had resulted in the suit melting into his skin, he changed his plans. Among those murdered during the massacre was Pardo's ex-wife, Sylvia. Investigators have speculated that the couple's marital problems likely served as the primary motive for the crime. Number 8. William Liskey. On October 31st of 2010, teenager Devin Griffin arrived at his mother's home in Benton Township, Ohio, after spending the weekend with his father. Devin only stayed long enough to change his shirt and then left to attend the morning church service. Upon his return, he went to his room and started playing video games, but in the afternoon, noticed that the house was uncharacteristically quiet. He went to check the room shared by his mother, 46-year-old Susan, and stepfather, William Liskey, aged 53. He received no answer upon knocking and entered the room to find them completely under the covers. He tried waking them up but was unsuccessful. Then as he pulled back the comforter, Devin was faced with their dead bodies covered in blood. He was in shock and at first believed the gruesome sight to be a Halloween prank, but then realized the horrific reality. Distraught, he ran out of the house and called an aunt, who consequently contacted the authorities. Devin would later learn that his brother Derek, aged 23, had also been murdered in his room. The killer was identified as William Liskey's son and Devin's stepbrother, 24-year-old William B.J. Liskey. He was later arrested at his family's cabin near Scio. In his teens, Liskey had been diagnosed with a schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type, and had spent time in mental health facilities. He was often in trouble with the authorities and on several occasions had lashed out against his father and stepmother with physical violence. On Halloween, he first went to Derek's room and, as he was sleeping, bludgeoned him to death with both ends of a claw hammer. He then locked the door behind him, heading to Susan and his father's bedroom, where they were both sleeping. He shot William 5 times in the head and face with a .22 caliber handgun and then shot Susan 3 times, killing her as well. He also abused his stepmother, but it's unclear if this occurred before or after he'd executed her. The awkward position in which her body was found seemingly supported the latter. Devon would tell investigators that when he'd arrived at the house to change for church, he'd talked to Liskey for a few minutes as he was leaving for the hunting cabin. The teenager would report that his stepbrother seemed to be in a surprisingly talkative and positive mood, which contrasted his usual sullen demeanor. Liskey pleaded guilty to the triple homicide and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in 2011. On March the 31st of 2015, he was found dead in his cell after succumbing to self-inflicted wounds. Number 7. Chelsea Bruck. In 2014, a 22-year-old woman was killed in the Frenchtown township of Michigan. Chelsea Bruck was last seen on October the 26th at a Halloween party where she'd gone dressed as Batman villain Poison Ivy. Roughly 6 months later, after Bruck's disappearance, her unclothed body was found abandoned in nearby woods. The authorities unequivocally confirmed that she'd been killed by Daniel Clay, a man in his mid-20s, who was arrested in 2016 based on DNA evidence recovered from Bruck's costume. However, according to his version of events, he'd never meant to kill Bruck. Clay reported that after a night of using drugs and alcohol at the party, he'd spotted her on the road and offered her a ride. He claimed that they then engaged in rough intercourse in his car and that he'd accidentally choked her to death. In court, he would state, "I didn't mean for it to end like this." Considering the manner in which he discarded her body, prosecutors argued that his only regret was having been caught. Additionally, there were signs of physical trauma indicating that Bruck had been repeatedly hit in the face. Clay denied attacking her. He was ultimately given a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 6. Rebecca J. Cade. Ohio woman Rebecca J. Cade of Chillicothe was brutally murdered in October of 2015, and her remains were at first misidentified as a Halloween decoration. 31-year-old Cade was found hanging by the sleeve of her sweatshirt from a chain link fence near an electric substation, and contractors working in the area initially believed she was a mannequin. As they got closer and attempted to remove her, they, much to their horror, realized that they were dealing with human remains. Cade had been bludgeoned, stabbed, and there was a burn mark on her back that had been made through 3 layers of clothing. Her face featured 2 stab wounds, each about 2 inches deep, which had left her unrecognizable, while her neck and torso were covered in additional injuries. She had fought back against her attacker with such desperation that one of her bicep muscles was severed, while the other was nearly torn off. Investigators postulated that she may have tried to climb the fence and flee her attacker before succumbing to her injuries. In the aftermath, 27-year-old Donnie Coconor Jr. was arrested and charged with her murder. A testimony from the man's sister, Lisa Frost, highlighted him as the prime suspect. She claimed that he'd gone to her home about 400 yards from the crime scene to take a shower and that there was blood and mud on his clothes. Frost also reported that Coconor had admitted to having fought with Cade and confessed he might have killed her. Upon being interrogated, Coconor told the police that he and Cade had had consensual intercourse on the night of her death and that afterwards there had been an argument between them which escalated into a physical altercation, yet he denied killing her. Coconor's sister would later reveal to the authorities that she'd lied about her brother's confession, blaming the false testimony on her heroin addiction. Frost reported that the blood on his clothes had been from him being attacked in a separate incident on the night. She spent a year in jail for evidence tampering. Once she got clean, Frost insisted on setting the record straight. In 2017, a jury was initially deadlocked, but eventually, after being asked by the judge to deliberate further, found Coconor not guilty. Number 5. Christopher Williams and Rebecca Kevin. Christopher Williams and his girlfriend Rebecca Kevin, both in their 20s, were attacked on Halloween 2019 while on a romantic getaway to Paris. After spending the night of October the 31st at a party, the British couple began the 10-minute walk back to their hotel in the early hours of the morning. 4 Frenchmen in a hatchback of estimated ages ranging from late teens to early 20s pulled up alongside the couple and started harassing Kevin, who was wearing a bunny girl costume. Williams, who was dressed as the Grim Reaper, positioned himself between them and his girlfriend. One of the occupants then yanked his arm and pulled it through the open passenger side window, The driver then accelerated and the Liverpool man was dragged roughly 160 feet at over 30 miles per hour up the Rue de la Roquette. He was then dropped and the group proceeded to beat him. He was stomped on, kicked and punched. Kevin chased after them and tried to intervene, at which point she was also struck in the face repeatedly. The 3-minute-long attack was broken up as pedestrians gathered on the street. Both Williams and Kevin had sustained broken noses and heavy facial bruising in what the couple described as a genuine Halloween nightmare. Williams was also left with a chipped tooth, while Kevin suffered a fractured finger. They reported the assault to the police, but it's unclear what arrests were made in the aftermath. Number 4. Madrid Arena Stampede. In 2012, a deadly stampede occurred during a Halloween party at the Madrid Arena, resulting in the death of 5 female attendees, all of whom were in the late teens and early 20s. Panic had overtaken the crowd, which had gathered at the venue during an event called Thriller Music Park, headlined by DJ Steve Aoki. The cause wasn't immediately identified, but it was later reported that the crush had been triggered by a flare being set off. It didn't take place on the dance floor, but in a passage of terror on a lower level, which was connected to the main floor via a stairwell. In the panic-driven chaos, concert-goers trampled each other in the narrow passageway. Roughly 50 medical personnel were called to the venue at around 4 a.m. 2 of the victims succumbed to cardiac arrest at the scene, while the other 3 passed away at the hospital. It took the authorities 3 hours following the incident to clear the arena. In the tragedy's aftermath, the event's promoter was given a 4-year jail term for negligent homicide after it emerged that 17,000 tickets had been sold, while the arena had been authorized to admit entry to only 10,600 people. Number 3. Carl Girard. On Halloween 2020, in what local authorities described as a night of horror, a man dressed in a medieval costume carried out a mass stabbing in Quebec City, Canada. The attacker was 24-year-old Carl Girard, and by all accounts he'd chosen his victims at random. Girard didn't have a criminal record and his motives remained unclear, but it was reported that he had a history of mental illness and that he'd threatened violence against others in the past. He wasn't a resident of the city, and according to Quebec City Police Chief Robert Pigeon, had traveled there with the express intention of doing the most damage possible. Armed with a katana-like sword, he carried out attacks at 4 different locations. 61-year-old Suzanne Clermont and Francois Deschênes, aged 56, were killed while 5 others were injured. One of the victims was butchered extensively and exhibited a piercing wound that went through the upper torso. Survivors had severe lacerations but were deemed to be outside mortal danger. Girard's rampage lasted for over 2 hours before he was apprehended without incident, as he was found barefoot and lying on the ground, exhibiting signs of hypothermia. From his car, the police retrieved multiple gasoline containers. In the wake of his rampage, he was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 5 counts of attempted murder. Today's topic, which has been one of the most asked about subjects we've ever had, was requested by Lil Penk, Nicole and Dennis Starkey, Janine M, and Kane Tudhope. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Shooting at Long Beach House. On October the 29th of 2019, a gang-related shooting occurred at a Halloween-themed party in Long Beach, California. Chanchenda Howe, the man who rented the single-story home near Temple Avenue, would later tell investigators that the party was hosted by his son for one of his co-workers. Around 30 people were in attendance when gunfire erupted and a hail of bullets descended upon the property's backyard. 35-year-old Melvin Williams II, along with Morris Poe Jr. and Ricardo Torres, both in their 20s, were pronounced dead at the scene. 9 others were injured. Howe's son, Daniel Chan, reported hearing a man dressed in all black shout out, "Are you prepared to die tonight?" and then fleeing the scene about an hour before the shooting commenced. It would later emerge that a Long Beach gang had misidentified the Halloween party as one put together by their rivals. Contrasting their beliefs, none of the guests had any known criminal affiliations. Initially, the investigation had limited leads, but by 2020, a dozen suspects were arrested, several of whom were charged with murder as the active gunmen. They traveled in 3 SUVs from North Long Beach and shot the gathering from an alley adjacent to the property in the 2700 block of East 7th Street. Number 1. Carly Rae Barron. On Halloween night, 2020, a verbal altercation escalated dramatically and resulted in the shooting of a young woman in Wilmington, North Carolina. Officers were investigating a noise complaint in the area, and they conversed at the 3600 block of Wrightsville Avenue upon hearing the sound of gunfire. After a traffic collision, 21-year-old Jaquan Cortez Jackson was arguing with a group of which 23-year-old Carly Ray Barron is believed to have been a part. Jackson discharged a firearm during the dispute and struck Barron, inflicting critical injuries. Arriving officers saw a vehicle speeding away. One member of law enforcement attempted to save the life of the victim, while the other pursued Jackson, who was stopped and detained. Barron was later pronounced dead at a local hospital. Jackson was charged with second-degree murder and held at the New Hanover County Jail under a $750,000 secured bond. Number 8. Chris Ojeda. In June of 2018, New Jersey man Chris Ojeda invited friends and relatives to his Somerset home for a triple celebration that included his birthday, Father's Day, and a gender reveal for his unborn child. A stunt regarding the latter involved 34-year-old Ojeda kicking a football filled with dye that was meant to reveal if he was going to have a boy or a girl. The guests had gathered in the garden and began filming the stunt. With a beer in one hand and sunglasses on his eyes, Ojeda kicked off his flip-flops and stepped up to the ball. He struck it, and a pink cloud of smoke filled the air as guests exclaimed, "It's a girl!" The celebratory atmosphere lasted but a moment, as after kicking the ball, Ojeda slipped and fell backwards on his foot, which bent at an awkward angle. He was left writhing in agony on the ground as his pregnant wife and other guests rushed to his aid. Ojeda, who'd heard several crunching sounds as he landed on his kicking foot, was helped to a chair, and the pain he experienced reportedly got so intense that his vision became blurry. His wife took him to the hospital where doctors would tell him that he'd broken his ankle. Ojeda, who'd come up with the idea for the gender reveal, was forced to stay off his injured leg for several weeks. Number 7. Texas plane crash. On September the 7th of 2019, a plane crashed in Turkey, Texas, while the pilot was carrying out an elaborate stunt as part of a gender reveal for a friend. The identities of those involved haven't been disclosed, but the aircraft was owned and operated by Horan Spraying Service, a crop dusting business based in Plainview. The one-seat plane was flying at a low altitude and stalled, following the release of about 350 gallons of pink water. It crashed into the ground, sustained considerable damage, and came to a stop inverted. Fortunately, the pilot and passenger survived the crash with minor injuries. There were no prior mechanical faults with the plane, and a National Transportation Safety Board report concluded that the aircraft simply got too slow and unbalanced following the water discharge. Number 6. Pamela Crimea. 56-year-old Pamela Crimea died in October of 2019 after being hit with shrapnel from an explosion involving an improvised device meant to be used during a gender reveal. The party was held at Crimea's residence in Marion County, Iowa, for her son Brad and his girlfriend, Kirsty Rankin. The family had placed colored powder along with gunpowder into a metal tube that was welded to a metal base. A piece of wood separated the two powders, and a hole had been drilled into the side of the tube for a fuse. The family expected that their improvised stand would function like a cannon, with the gunpowder ignited and pushing the dye through the top of the tube, which had been covered with tape. They'd hoped to post the reveal on social media for other loved ones to see. The party took a tragic turn as the contraption ended up functioning like a pipe bomb. The blast obliterated the tube and base, sending metal fragments flying at great speed. One of the shards struck Crimea in the head, even though she was 45 feet from the blast zone. She died on the spot, and the projectile that hit her flew for another 144 yards before landing in a nearby field. Sheriff Jason Sandholt expressed his condolences to the family, but also offered the incident as a reminder to members of the public of how dangerous homemade explosives can be. Number 5. Autumn Garrett. On July the 8th of 2017, a mass shooting occurred at a house in Coleraine, Ohio, during a gender reveal party held for 21-year-old Cheyenne Willis. About a dozen guests had stayed into the night to watch a Spider-Man movie. At around 11 p.m., two gunmen burst into the Capstan Drive home and opened fire on those inside. At least 14 bullets flew through the living room before the attackers fled. 8 people and a dog were injured, while Willis's cousin, 22-year-old Autumn Garrett was shot dead. Willis was shot in the thigh and, in the aftermath, reported that she'd suffered a miscarriage. The authorities would face difficulty in piecing together the context and circumstances surrounding the shooting, as many witnesses had given them false leads. In fact, Willis would also reveal that in spite of her initial statements, she was never pregnant. It's unclear why she'd lied and held what was essentially a fake gender reveal party. Investigators connected a number of survivors to drug activity, but fatal victim Garrett, a young mother from Indiana, and her husband, who was among those injured, didn't have such affiliations and were only guests. Law enforcement eventually found that Willis had been the target, but concluded that the gunman had opened fire with the intention of killing everyone inside. Willis had become the focus of a murder-for-hire plot orchestrated by Rashawn Bishop, aged 28, who was already in custody on drug trafficking charges at the time of the shooting. He enlisted the help of a man named Vandell Slade, who produced 2 shooters for hire from Columbus. They were identified as James Eccles and Michael Sannon, both in their early 20s, and Slade had reportedly been the one to drive the shooters to the residence. All 4 men were charged in the aftermath of the shooting with murder and attempted murder. Prior to the attempt on her life, Willis had been the target of another violent attack. On Christmas Eve 2014, she was assaulted by another woman in a parking lot, and the attacker, who claimed Willis had stolen her car, wrote an explicit confirmation of the beatdown on her forehead in permanent marker. The altercation was filmed and the clip went viral, but the charges against the attacker were eventually dropped after Willis failed to show up for court. Number 4. Incendiary burnout. In 2019, law enforcement from Australia's Queensland state released drone footage of a vehicle that had erupted in flames as part of a warning against burnouts, an increasingly popular trend among people looking to make an impression with their gender reveal parties. The cars are rigged to emit clouds of either blue or pink smoke, but the stunts can often end in disaster, as demonstrated in the footage shared by the authorities. The incident had occurred on April the 18th of 2018. At first, the reveal had gone as planned, with guests celebrating as they filmed the car driving down the road engulfed in blue smoke. Shortly after coming to a stop, however, it caught fire, forcing the driver and other guests to flee for their lives. It kept burning in the middle of the road as thick smoke, which from blue had turned to black, rose into the air. A spokesman for the Queensland Police Service told the media that as a result of the incident, a 29-year-old man was convicted of dangerous operation of a motor vehicle. Number 3. Christopher Peckney. In February of 2021, expecting father Christopher Peckney from New York was killed in an explosion by a contraption he'd been building for the gender reveal of his unborn child. 28-year-old Peckney had been assembling the device, which reportedly contained a pipe, in his garage alongside his brother, Michael. Both men were described by other family members as mechanically gifted. The nature of the gender reveal invention wasn't specified by the authorities, but some have speculated that in trying to build a device that would release smoke or fireworks, Peckney had inadvertently created a pipe bomb. The police, responding to reports of an explosion, arrived at the residence in the Catskills town of Liberty. The blast had killed Peckney instantly and injured Michael, who was rushed to the hospital and treated for severe injuries to his legs, with medical staff essentially having to rebuild one of his knees. Today's topic was requested by Instagram follower Nicety K50 Life Family Coach and 1965 Fly Girl. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below, or follow us on Instagram and reach out to us there. Number 2. Gender reveal in Philadelphia. In 2018, a video started circulating on YouTube of a gender reveal party that went wrong in Philadelphia. The clip was even featured on the New York Post's channel, but the identities of those involved weren't made public. An expecting couple lit the fuse in some firework tubes with the color of the pyrotechnics expected to indicate the gender of their unborn child. Some commenters were quick to point out the couple's poor decision-making, as they'd chosen to set the fireworks off from a wobbly clothes rack. Soon enough, several were launched into the sky, but the tremor from their ignition had caused others to topple over from their unsteady support. Panicked screaming erupted as the pyrotechnics started flying into the partygoers. The footage would show several of them, including the camera handler, fleeing in an effort to escape the barrage of hot sparks. Fortunately, none of the children in attendance were hurt and only a few adults suffered minor burns. Number 1. sawmill fire. In April of 2017, a wildfire burned through nearly 47,000 acres in the state of Arizona, and its origin was traced to a gender reveal stunt. While not the only massive blaze linked to such a party, the sawmill fire, as it came to be known, is believed to have been the first. On April the 23rd, as part of the gender reveal celebrations, off-duty U.S. Border Patrol agent Dennis Dickey shot at a target packed with a highly explosive substance called tannerite in the Coronado State Forest. He missed the first few times but hit it on the fourth shot, triggering blue smoke and a fireball. The surrounding grass was instantly ignited, and Dickey reportedly tried to put it out but couldn't because of how rapidly the blaze was spreading. He contacted the authorities and cooperated with them after taking responsibility for the fire. Conditions of unusually low precipitation for the region and winds of up to 40 miles per hour contributed to its rapid expansion. The fire burned for 11 days and ravaged terrain in spite of initial interventions from 5 air tankers and 3 helicopters carrying water. Containing and extinguishing it took the combined efforts of over 800 personnel from local, state, and federal agencies. No one was hurt and no buildings were damaged, but suppressing the sawmill fire cost an estimated $8.2 million. Dickey pleaded guilty to the charge of starting a fire without a permit. He was sentenced to 5 years probation and ordered to pay $200,000 in restitution. In November of 2018, under the Freedom of Information Act, the Arizona Daily Star obtained the initial video of Dickey shooting the explosive target. The footage circulated and was mocked by online users, some of whom also ridiculed the concept of gender reveal parties. Number 10. Jade Harrison. On October the 7th of 2019, a young British woman suffered severe injuries after she was flung from a ride at the Hull Fair, one of Europe's largest and oldest traveling fun fairs. 21-year-old Jade Harrison was on the Air Max 360 ride when it started to bounce and tilt. She was flung from her seat like a rag doll and into the barrier. A teenage boy sustained minor injuries as Harrison struck him when she fell. Harrison was rushed to the hospital with broken teeth and a fractured jaw which required surgery. The woman was unable to smile as metal plates were inserted into her face. She also struggled to walk due to extensive bruising and nerve damage in her leg. Harrison would suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and had to undergo cognitive behavioral therapy as part of her recovery. The ride's operators admitted liability and paid for Harrison's treatment. More than a year from the accident, she still had trouble eating hard foods, experienced partial loss of feeling in her leg, and got jittery whenever she was in a moving vehicle or heard loud noises. Today's featured fan shoutout is Instagram follower Kaylee Wilson49. To appear in our next video, send us your pic rocking the latest merch from theywillkillyou.com and send it in to us on Instagram today. Number 9. Matt Landon. In 2014, teenager Matt Landon was on a ride called Skyfire at the Colorado State Fair alongside his sister, 22-year-old Tawny Martinez. The ride swung riders upside down and held them in that position for several seconds before dropping them. The first time that Landon became inverted, his shoulder harness snapped, forcing the teen to hang on for his life. Martinez, who was still strapped in, captured the incident on her phone. As the ride swung back down, Landon felt his shoulder pop, but fortunately suffered no further injuries. It would later be determined that he'd torn multiple shoulder muscles. The attraction's operators blamed a faulty latch and claimed they'd fix it, while Landon told a media outlet, "I'm not riding any ride ever." Number 8. Cool Patch Pumpkins Corn Maze. A number of fairs feature corn mazes, popular tourist attractions that have been cut out of cornfields in North America since the early 1980s. The Guinness Book of Records attributed the title of largest corn maze in 2014 to the one created by Cool Patch Pumpkins in Dixon, California. That year, the maze measured over 60 acres, with hundreds of dead ends. To put that tremendous size into perspective, it covers a surface area larger than the US Capitol or New York City's Grand Central Station. However, according to Matt Cooley, who was running the maze, it had potentially grown to dangerous proportions. There had been instances in the past of people passing out while looking for the exit, but none were reported in serious condition. However, the same year that the maze achieved world record status, a number of 911 calls had been placed by visitors in need of rescue. One reported being lost in a maze for 4 hours. Another was worried that they'd be left in the maze overnight, as the 10 p.m. closing time was approaching and they still hadn't found their way out. In light of these issues, Cool Patch Pumpkins decided to reduce the size of the maze in its future iterations. Number 7. Chuang Chu Kit. In September of 2017, a Hong Kong student was part of a group given early access to attractions that were going to be part of a Halloween-themed fair at Ocean Park. One of them was called Buried Alive and, according to the website, offered visitors to experience being buried alive alone before fighting their way out of their dark and eerie grave. At one point, those entering the haunted house attraction would go down slides in coffins. 21-year-old Chuang Chu Kit left the coffin and walked towards the exit. Unfortunately, one of the actors meant to guide him on the correct route was standing behind a curtain and didn't see him. Another actor had spotted Chuang going the wrong way, but mistook him for a staff member because he was wearing black. The student ended up at the bottom of another movable slide and was crushed by an incoming coffin. Chuang struggled to breathe as he was pinned under its weight and ultimately suffocated. He was taken to a hospital where he was pronounced dead, and the haunted house was closed, pending an investigation. Number 6. Unnamed carnival worker. In 2018, a carnival worker fell to his death while inspecting a ride at the Kiwanis Club Fair in Alexander City, Alabama. Only identified as a 45-year-old man originally from Belarus, the worker was asked to inspect a wheel situated at an estimated 30 feet on the Ring of Fire ride. The towering attraction turned riders upside down by hurling them around a central loop. It had a daily maintenance checklist that operators needed to go through before allowing fairgoers on it. However, the Ring of Fire wasn't the ride normally assigned to the Belarusian worker, so when the designated inspector arrived at the scene, he was asked to climb back down. It was at that moment that he slipped and plummeted to the ground. He sustained critical injuries from which he passed away soon after. The fair and the ride he'd been inspecting reportedly remained open in the aftermath of his demise. Number 5. Ride collapse in Shaoyang County. 16 people were hurt in February of 2021 following the collapse of a ride at a fair in Shaoyang County, central China. Those who'd queued up for the ride heard the malfunction alarm while the flying chairs were still swinging in the air. The ride gathered speed before suddenly tilting over. Viral footage circulated online showed the terrifying moment that the chairs got progressively closer to the ground before crashing into it. Most of those injured were bystanders, 3 of whom were taken to the hospital in critical condition. The incident would later be described as a mechanical glitch, even though the ride had been inspected and declared safe roughly a month prior. The fair was closed down and several of the ride's operators were detained for questioning by the authorities. Reactions condemning the incident and lack of proper safety regulation were plentiful on the country's Weibo social media site. Number 4. John Weed. In the fall of 2019, John Weed was one of the visitors at the Great Frederick Fair in Maryland. 59-year-old Weed was enjoying the fair's amenities when he was approached by 2 teenage brothers and their friends. They asked him for money, but Weed refused to give them any. The group kept badgering Weed while his family members pleaded with them to leave him alone. They appeared to walk away, but as Weed turned around, a 16-year-old boy punched him in the back of the head. As he turned around to face his attacker, the teen's younger brother, aged 15, ran at Weed and struck him in the head. The punch was delivered with such force that the man lost consciousness almost immediately. The second blow proved fatal, as Weed passed away from massive head trauma. Prosecutors argued that the teen should be tried as adults, but after a lengthy hearing in February of 2020, the court determined that they were to remain in the juvenile system. Number 3. Missouri State Fair race car crashes. In August of 2012, the Missouri State Fair featured a charity race meant to raise money for the Special Olympics. The vehicles involved in the race were old police cars. Earlier in the evening, a 15-year-old driver whose name wasn't released lost control of his vehicle while going around a bend. His car overturned several times and the teen subsequently had to be airlifted to a local hospital. Then at around 9 p.m., 25-year-old off-duty officer Tyson Russell was also involved in an accident after the race car he was driving careered off track. It flew over a guardrail, through a safety fence and into spectators who'd gathered to watch the race. Russell wasn't hurt, but 5 people sustained various injuries, 2 of whom were in serious condition. The victims, aged from 27 to 67, were hospitalized. According to a Highway Patrol spokesperson, one of them sustained a broken leg that potentially required amputation. The police claim they wouldn't be investigating the crashes because they occurred during a private function. Today's topic was requested by Jen J71. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. He. On February the 15th of 2016, a young man died at a temple fair in China's Hebei province after getting crushed by machinery. The 19-year-old victim, identified as E by his surname, was on the pirate ship attraction at the fairgrounds. According to witnesses, E was very excited and stood up from his seat. Unfortunately, he lost his grip and fell forward. The teenager was crushed as his body was dragged under the mechanical workings of the ride. Staff pulled him out and paramedics tried to resuscitate him, but it was to no avail. He was pronounced dead at the scene. An investigation was launched to determine if alcohol or other substances had played a role in the teen's behavior on the pirate ship. A confirmation in that regard would partially place responsibility on the ride's operators for allowing E to be on it while intoxicated. Number 1. Gillingham Fair disaster. In the 1920s, every summer a fair was organized at Gillingham Park in Kent, England, with the aim of raising funds for a local hospital. The festivities would typically conclude with a demonstration by the Gillingham Fire Brigade. Considered the highlight of the fair, a 3-story house was built out of wooden canvas. A mock wedding was put together inside, in which 2 firefighters acting as bride and groom would entertain various guests. Then, a fire emergency was simulated with the use of smoke bombs and flares, requiring the building's occupants to be rescued from the upper levels. Once everyone was out, a real fire was started, enabling the fire brigade to demonstrate their skills. In July of 1929, however, as those inside were preparing to carry out the staged rescue, the real fire was lit. The cause of the confusion remains unknown. The blaze rapidly overtook the building, trapping people inside. The fire brigade knew right away that they were dealing with a real emergency, but the crowd mistook the screams and cries for help as acting. They cheered and applauded what they believed to be a realistic performance, accompanied by spectacular effects. It was only after they witnessed 2 people with burning clothes jumping from atop the building that the tragic reality was made clear. 13 people died at the scene and 2 more succumbed to their injuries at the very hospital for which the fair had been organized. Number 10. December the 26th, 2016. Prior to her birthday, the parents of Ruby Ibarra Garcia accidentally posted a public invitation for everyone to attend her 15th party. Held in La Jolla community in central Mexico, a horse race was to be put on in her honor, with the winner taking away a grand prize of 10,000 pesos, or about $490. The invitation went viral on social media, and thousands of people turned up to help her celebrate her special day and partake in the race. 66-year-old Felix Peña was one attendee that hoped to walk away a winner. A local stable worker, Peña regularly raced horses and had entered his own horse, Oso Dormido, into the event. As he stood cheering on, he somehow stepped into the path of a galloping horse and was trampled. Some eyewitnesses speculated that he might have misjudged the distance and speed of the oncoming horse, but it's still unclear what had led the experienced horseman into its path. Peña was rushed to a hospital but died on the way. When asked about the party, police said that, apart from his accident, it had gone on peacefully. Number 9. 22nd of May, 2021. Stephen Anderson and his family traveled for a weekend getaway to Center Hill Lake, Tennessee, with 2 other couples to celebrate his birthday. Unfortunately, the celebrations were abruptly cut short on Saturday. Whilst enjoying a day at the lake, the father of 2 fell from a rock bluff and died. He had decided to scale the rocks to gain a better vantage point from which to jump into the lake, but as he was climbing, he lost his footing. He was seen hitting rock after rock as he tumbled down the cliff and into the water. The recovery process required the collaboration of many, but his body was finally found and recovered with the use of a remote aquatic robot 165 feet below the surface. Number 8. 22nd of May, 2021. Another person tragically fell to their death at a birthday party, also on May the 22nd of 2021. 24-year-old investment firm employee Cameron Pirelli was attending a rooftop party in Manhattan's East Village when she slipped and fell between two buildings. It was reported that she'd been trying to climb between two rooftops and was attempting to use an air conditioning vent when she slipped. She fell at around 3 a.m. on Saturday morning and was taken to a local hospital where she was declared dead. Authorities didn't suspect foul play, but Pirelli's family was left confused as she'd never been one to take risks. Her death prompted officials to call for a crackdown on a string of weekly overcrowded and noisy rooftop parties reported in the area. Number 7. Teodoro Macias. May the 9th, 2021. Sandra Ibarra and her extended family were gathered to celebrate her birthday on May the 9th of 2021, when it was crashed by her boyfriend. Fueled by rage over not being invited, her boyfriend, Teodoro Macias, showed up to the birthday party and opened fire on the attendees. The couple had been dating for a year, but recent tensions between Macias and her family, stemming from another family gathering, compelled her to forego his invite. 7 people were killed, including Ibarra and Macias, who ended the attack by taking his own life in front of adults and children alike. Extensive interviews with Ibarra's family led police to believe that, at the core, it had been a horrendous act of domestic violence and characterized Macias as controlling and jealous. Number 6. December the 15th, 2015. 2 gunmen forced their way into a children's birthday party at a motel in Santee, South Carolina, in what was deemed as an attempted robbery. The armed robbers forced the 2 adults, 3 children, and 1 infant in attendance into a corner and demanded that the father of the birthday girl give them his property. The man was about to begin cutting his daughter's birthday cake when the 2 party crashers barged in, brandishing guns. According to reports, the gunman fired shots outside the room and even held up a 7-year-old child at gunpoint as a means of scaring the victims. Once the robbers got what they wanted, they made a quick getaway in a woman's car but were caught soon after. Police identified the perpetrators as Santee locals 24-year-old Alexander Outlaw and 17-year-old Rufus Gates. Outlaw was charged with 6 counts of kidnapping, first-degree burglary, and possession of a weapon during a violent crime and was given a 10-year sentence. Gates faced multiple charges of kidnapping, armed robbery, and possession of a weapon, but the charges were dropped. Still a minor, Gates pleaded guilty to second-degree robbery and was sentenced to a maximum of 5 years under the Youthful Offenders Act. Police identified the getaway car and the driver pled guilty to misprision of a felony, but the judge dropped her 5-year sentence to 1 year on probation. Number 5. July 28th, 2019. Fit and healthy Cambridge University graduate Dominic Hamlin unexpectedly died at his brother's birthday party while performing a party trick he'd practiced since childhood. It was more of a challenge in which opponents would swim as many lengths of the pool as they could underwater before they had to rise to the surface to take a breath. Hamlin had swum about 2.5 lengths when he became unresponsive and stopped moving. His unconscious body was pulled from the water within seconds, and his father, a neurosurgeon, began to give him emergency treatment until paramedics arrived. Despite the quick response, doctors were not able to save him, and he died in a hospital 15 hours later. In the past, Hamlin was known to reach 5 or 6 lengths before needing to take a breath. The official cause of death was acute cardiac arrhythmia, but doctors stated they could only speculate on the underlying cause to which his death could be attributed. Number 4. May 30th, 2020. Ryan Farrell rented a high-rise apartment building in Melbourne to celebrate his girlfriend's birthday, but left in handcuffs after stabbing and killing his childhood best friend, Liam Cahill. A few hours into the party, Cahill had an altercation with another guest and Farrell promptly asked him to leave. Offended that he was the one being kicked out, a fight broke out between the friends. During the brawl, Farrell grabbed a kitchen knife and plunged it through Cahill's chest. The victim stumbled into the hallway before collapsing and dying. Farrell, upon finding his body, pleaded with him to wake up, but then chose to flee by scaling the apartment building and breaking into another flat. He was spotted by police at the bottom and he was taken into custody. In court, Farrell insisted that Cahill had punched him first and had him backed into a corner. Nonetheless, Farrell said he was consumed with guilt and regret. He pled guilty to manslaughter. Cahill and Farrell had grown up side by side since primary school and were both studying as apprentice plumbers. Cahill's father condemned it as a despicable act of betrayal and vowed he'd never forgive Farrell. Number 3. 28th of February 2020. Russian influencer Ekaterina Didenko's birthday party in February of 2020 turned to tragedy when a stunt involving dry ice went wrong. The famous blogger and her husband had been hosting friends at a Moscow pool complex to celebrate her 29th, when over 55 pounds of dry ice were thrown into a swimming pool. It was intended to create a dramatic visual effect to impress guests, but instead sent 7 people to the hospital and killed 3. When added to the pool, the frozen carbon dioxide created a thick, toxic vapor that caused acute carbon dioxide poisoning and chemical burns to partygoers in the pool. Didenko's husband was amongst those taken to the hospital, but his injuries proved too severe and he was pronounced dead shortly after. While at the hospital, Didenko posted multiple videos to her 1 million subscribers, updating them on her state and breaking the news about her husband. As her following began to grow in the aftermath, she continued to post videos documenting her grief, for which she was branded immoral. Prior to the tragedy, as a trained pharmacist, Didenko dedicated her page to sharing advice about at-home medicine, along with glimpses into her personal life. Today's topic was requested by Scotty Lewis and P. Calls. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. December the 24th, 2019. Caroli Dawn Taylor's uncle was hosting her 46th birthday party at his house in Harris County, Texas, when her violent ex-boyfriend, Albert Benjamin Simon, turned up and demanded to see her. Taylor's uncle had watched Simon pull up in front of his house just before 9 p.m. and, recognizing who he was, walked out to meet him. Simon, in turn, met him with the barrel of a gun pointed at his chest and forced his way into the party. Moments after the final notes of Happy Birthday rang out. Brandishing 2 guns, he took Taylor outside onto the porch and threatened to kill her if any partygoers called the police. Shortly after, multiple gunshots echoed out, and Taylor's uncle is said to have found her dead with 5 gunshot wounds to her head and body. Simon fled the scene and was missing for several days, during which he apparently sought out a friend to hide his car and confessed to the murder. 4 days after the shooting, Simon was located sitting on a bench in Herman Park. The altercation that followed led a deputy to open fire on the hostile suspect, hitting him at least 2 times. He was rushed to the closest hospital but succumbed to his injuries. Number 1. October the 6th, 2018. 18 people were riding in a 2011 Ford Excursion limousine on the afternoon of October the 6th of 2018 when it crashed in Schoharie, New York. The group had gathered to celebrate the birthday of Amy Steenberg and was made up of her newlywed husband as well as her closest friends and relatives. The limousine was on the way to the birthday venue at a local brewery when it blew through an intersection, crashed into a parked car and went flying into a ravine, along with the death of the driver and all 17 passengers. 2 nearby pedestrians were struck and killed in the crash. Investigations into the tragedy found fault in the vehicle, the driver, and the company. The limousine had failed 2 mechanical inspections for deficient brakes and been ordered out of service by the state. Furthermore, the vehicle was only certified to take 10 of the 17 passengers, and the driver was licensed to take less than 15. The owner and operator, Nauman Hussein, was arrested and charged for criminally negligent homicide and second-degree manslaughter. He fought the accusation by stating the brake failure was unforeseen and that the owner should be on the fraudulent shop they had hired to fix the brakes. The limousine crash made history as the deadliest U.S. transportation accident in 9 years. Thanks for watching. Would you rather never celebrate your birthday again or never be able to travel abroad again? Let us know in the comments section below.